if you can actually see past the illusion of what life is positioned as, and genuinely then learn these incredible skills of acceptance, awareness, presence, gratitude, the alchemy of mindfulness, if you like, then you're living in a different way.
You are listening to Personal Development Mastery, empowering you with the simple and consistent actions needed to master personal development and create a life of purpose and abundance. I'm your host, Agi Keramidas, and my mission is simple: to inspire you to take action towards a purposeful and fulfilling life. In this podcast, I invite myself inside the minds of remarkable entrepreneurs, authors, thought leaders, spiritual teachers. So if you're ready to find practical insights that you can implement right now, make sure you follow the podcast and get the episodes as soon as they are released. Today's episode is about the art of living well and how to die happy. Today I am delighted to speak with Martin O'Toole. Martin, you are, as you say, a man on the mend. You were a high-functioning alcoholic adman for over 20 years who eventually left your hectic existence in London to live a mindful life in Indonesia. You have been talked out of a suicide attempt by your dog, and this rock-bottom moment launched a phenomenal journey of self-healing and personal transformation, during which you discovered the alchemy of everlasting happiness, what you call the anatomy of happy. You recently published your first book, How to Die Happy, where you offer curated wisdom, stories, and utilities for the art of living. Martin, welcome to Personal Development Mastery. I'm delighted to speak with you today.
Likewise. Hey, Aggie, how are you? And thanks for having me.
I'm very well. I'm very excited for this conversation, and I've been looking forward to it. Your book, and I will say that straight from the beginning of the conversation, it does indeed offer an approach that gives so many teachings. You have combined ancient wisdom teachings, modern and old, and you have presented some a beautiful book that gives also practical things for the reader to do. So I started with with this, and I'm just sharing that. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you about some of the topics in the book.
That's very kind of you to say. Did you enjoy the book then, I take it?
Yeah, very much. Martin, there were, and I was telling you earlier before we started recording, there were some, especially some bits that caught my attention very much. And I suppose different people will be drawn more to different aspects of the book because you have covered... I think it's a guide to follow, but let's not, before we go into the book, I really want... And I always do that on my podcast. I start with some kind of background, some story, some element of my guests' journey that really defined them into the person that they are today. And, I think for me, and when I was reading it in your book, that story where you were about to commit suicide and it was your dog, your beagle, that saved you. I found that a very powerful story, and I would like, without going into details of it, just to hear the Martin on the two sides of it in the most concise version you can, because I think that would give a good understanding of who you are and somehow how you came here.
Sure. Yeah, well, my mum was an alcoholic. That's the first thing to say. And she was an alcoholic my whole life. And so I had a very traumatic childhood. And I didn't realize, but I was a victim of abuse and ultimately of PTSD. So I carried that on into my adulthood. without having a clue that I was mentally ill. And this just continued to spiral and spiral. I became a heavy drinker and a drug user quite early on, as an alcoholic and cocaine addict, probably for around 20 years. And my mum died in 2014, and it was spiraling out of control after she died, where there were many things that were causing me anxiety at the time, but ultimately I hit rock bottom. And I'd got to the point where I'd made such a mess with so many friendships, with so many business partners, with romantic partners. There was a scarred landscape of spilt milk under burnt bridges everywhere, and I just got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. I was ashamed. I was guilty. I was depressed to the point of paralysis. And I'm sure anyone who's listening to the show now who has known true depression will understand what I mean, where you are lost inside in the center of that swirling vortex, and there is no way you can get out. And ultimately, I was, before I knew it, I was very drunk already. I was already very high on drugs. I was at home. So I got my shotgun, I cleaned it, and then bizarrely I loaded it. So it was a double barrel over and under shotgun, and I loaded both barrels. Now, anyone who knows anything about gun safety will know that you never, ever, ever point the scary end of a gun at anyone, even if you know it's not loaded. So, and then I found myself with the gun loaded that I just loaded, pointing at my face, and I came immensely close to killing myself. And my beagle talked me out of it. She just pushed I was sitting in the dark living room, and she pushed the door open and shed some light in from the kitchen, and she just stood in the light and then sort of sat down and just looked up at me. And to this day, I still don't know whether that look was don't do it or who's going to feed me. But either way, it was enough for me to just stop, break the barrel, throw the cartridges on the floor, and basically cry at my dog. So yeah, it was definitely one of a handful of very transitional moments. Not the last, but certainly the first.
You have described that. I remember you described it in that what happened in your book, like you were given a second chance, I think, or I think you also used the term metamorphosis of some kind, and
a messy metamorphosis.
I think it has to be, doesn't it? I mean, metamorphosis can't be smooth. You have to dissolve who you are at the previous stage, or the caterpillar anyway. But I think it is a very good metaphor, and that's why we use it. Something has to dissolve or to die, actually. And you have a quote in your book by Eckhart Tolle, which reminded me of something I had read many years ago when I went to Mount Athos, the holy mountain in Greece. And there was a big sign on the wall, and it said, if you die before you die, then you won't die when you die. And I was so impressed.
Absolutely.
I was mesmerized by that quote. I took a photograph of it and I was trying to contemplate. And I mean, I was in my late 20s at that time. I was not in a personal development journey, but I was contemplating, what would that quote mean? And now, actually, because I think it's appropriate for you to ask you, how does that mean to you? What does that phrase, die before you die, so that you won't die when you die? Because you have really, much knowledge and personal experience of that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's obviously a great prose. I use, as you've identified, something similar by Eckhart Tolle in the book, and indeed I talk at length about what I refer to as the gift of life within a life. And this plays to your question. Ultimately, we can, if we are not careful, spend our entire life not living. Or perhaps it might be more appropriate to say not being. We are born into a system of materialism, of consumerism, of control, where various authorities and organizations and corporations are very keen for us to do certain things, essentially so that they have control, so that they make more money out of us, whatever those drivers are. We live often in the illusion of freedom, where actually, if you have a kind of a series of events like happened to me, then suddenly you're able to step back from it all and start to see the illusion of life. I'm not saying we all live like this, of course. I'm just saying it's a possibility for so many of us. Ultimately, it's what I call life on the hamster wheel. It's what the movie The Matrix really talks about. There's a chapter in the book called Was The Matrix a Documentary? Essentially making these observations that if we're not careful, very early on, we're encouraged to get ourselves in significant financial debt, go to school, learn a lot of things we're never going to use, but we do also learn how to do as we're told, get onto the hamster wheel, into some sort of a career that for many of us, sadly, is immensely unfulfilling. And we give ourselves 2, maybe 3 weeks holiday a year, which is absolutely insane if you think about how hard we work. And then we wait until we're 65 until we can actually start living. So this really gets to the whole premise, and that is that is not a life. Now, I'm sure some people would say, well, it is. Okay, yes, it's a degree of living, of course it is. But it's not what it could be. It's not all that it can be. And I know that from personal experience, and just from the simple fact that since I unplugged myself from the Matrix and I left London and moved to Bali, I'm actually surrounded by like-minded individuals who have decided, no, that's not the life I want, actually. So, and there are obviously lots of different ways to do it. So it's the idea that if you can actually see past the illusion of what life is positioned as, and genuinely then learn these incredible skills of acceptance, awareness, presence, gratitude, the alchemy of mindfulness, if you like, then you're living in a different way. And when it comes to actually dying, and this is obviously part and parcel of the book's concept, the idea is if you have lived in such a way, then you are most certain to die with few to no regrets. And that's the précis to the book, really, is talking about research, albeit some anecdotal and some scientific, that talks about deathbed regrets. And when you look at these regrets, it's actually quite heartbreaking. You know, it's people saying, I wish I'd taken better care of my body. I wish I'd said I love you more. I wish I'd spent less time at work and more time with family. I wish I'd had the courage to express my true self. I wish I'd known that happiness was a choice much sooner. That one breaks my heart every time I say it. You know, so these are the things that people are saying when it's too late for them to have that life that they could have had. So the whole premise of the book is to essentially say, we in the West have a bit of a bizarre relationship with death, with permanence. We put it off, we deny it. And in doing so, we are also denying the magic of true living, or living well, as I like to say.
Before we continue, I want to share something with you that I believe you'll find incredibly valuable. We are drowning in information but starving for wisdom. And with over 300 episodes, this podcast has plenty of it, but who has the time to listen to all of them? That's why I've curated the top 10 podcast episodes offering the greatest value in each of the three main categories of life: money, health, and self-mastery. Get your free resource now by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting personaldevelopmentmasterypodcast.com/top10. Now, let's continue where we left off. You know, I like very much, and it's of course it's appropriate because the title of your book is How to Die Happy, but it is becomes so obvious when you start reading about it that in order to die happy, you have to live well, to choose to live well. It's not like about the moment of death that, a trick to do at that time. And Martin, I really would like to discuss about death and dying, the taboo of all taboos, as you say in the book. And, the question I want to ask you, and I think it's also a question for everyone to ask themselves, because dying is inevitable, it's a fundamental part of life, yet we are very hesitant to talk about it. We kind of, many of us, ignore it or try not to, and you say, don't be morbid or things like that. So obviously you get into that with your book. So I would like to hear your thoughts on why do we have this kind of relationship with death?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, the reality is there are a number of reasons why we, particularly in Western civilization, have such a perverse relationship with death. Well, let's look at the obvious ones: social conditioning, familial conditioning, religious conditioning, the media, movies, for example, television. We have folklore, of course, telling us about all the scary things and the scary characters involved when we die. And depending on which religion you follow, you're either a one-shot Christian who's either going to heaven, hell, or purgatory, or you're a Buddhist who's reincarnating, or a Hindu who's reincarnating. Right? Actually, I think even Scientologists believe in reincarnation. So there are those obvious factors, and obviously, if this stuff is taught to us from a young age, then unfortunately, it's ingrained in our psyche. I would say fear plays an absolutely huge role in all of it for everyone, for many reasons, of course. We have, as you know, we have a limbic brain system, and inside that is the amygdala, which releases hormones to trigger us into fight, flight, or freeze response as and when required. And essentially, change is one of the core drivers to that response. We physically fear change in all its shapes and forms. In fact, there is a condition. The condition of the fear of change is known as metathesiophobia, which, as you'll know, comes from the Greek change and fear, right? Two words and a word in the middle. So, and for some of us, metathesiophobia is common garden, and then for others, it is crippling. Hence the phenomenon of fear paralysis. So, for many of us, we can become anxious, we can become stressed, we can be sleepless, we can literally become gibbering messes. So if you think about the science behind that, it's quite fascinating actually to consider. One of the reasons why we put something like death so far, push it so far away, is because our brain, albeit the lizard brain, and our body tell us that every time we think about something like that, it literally makes us sick. So this is why the ego behaves in the way it behaves in certain situations. So, and that's fear, that's the fear response. So, but the reality is, we have a cognitive dissonance around death, and it's not something that's shared the world over, Aggie. That's the thing. I live over in Indonesia, and the Balinese Hindus embrace death, as do the Buddhists, of course. And I talk about the Buddhists, the Taoists, the Confucianists, and many other ancient philosophies in the book, because I'm very keen to resurrect, pardon the religious reference, but to resurrect these incredible teachings that are thousands of years old, which in reality are closer to modern day psychology than any religion that we would that we would follow, and all of these philosophies talk about the ever-present existence of death and our bizarre relationship to it, and try to essentially offer up some suggestions of what we can do. Now, as you said, death is inevitable. We all know without a shadow of a doubt that we're going to die. We all know that everyone we know is going to die. So then it's actually quite bizarre, if you think about it, that we're still surprised when someone dies. In fact, the expression "unexpected death" isn't that a strange expression? I don't understand. There's no such thing as an unexpected death. Yeah, of course you might say, yeah, but she was 5 when she died, and of course such a thing is tragic, but still, it's not to be unexpected, because we know throughout history that we can die in so many different ways, at so many ages. Some are accidents, some are at the hands of someone else. Of course, some are at the hands of ourselves. And I don't mean to disrespect anyone grieving right now, incidentally, because of course it's quite a triggering conversation to have. But then at the same time, I do strongly invite people to ask themselves why they are triggered by such a thing, because this is why we have this societal problem. This is why we can't talk about death, because people immediately have an emotional response to it, attaching their own story. Oh, you can't talk about death. My mum died. Well, my mum died too. It's an irrational response to a conversation that I propose should be had at a very young age, en masse, in public, and it should be encouraged, because what the whole point of this book, the premise is to say that if we do not embrace death, then by definition, we are also not embracing life. And we're not, and it really comes down to the fact that everything in this universe, in this plane, if you like, is subject to the same universal law of impermanence. That is to say, change. In fact, the one universal constant is inconstance. And until we can have grown-up, untriggered, unemotional conversations about these things, we will struggle to evolve. That's essentially my supposition, and of course, it's not just my supposition. I've learned this from Eastern philosophies and through life experience, that ultimately, if I can reframe my relationship with the idea that everything is impermanent, then, as the Buddha said, attachment is the root of all suffering. If I can get my head around some way of living a life of non-attachment, not apathy, connection, not clinging, if that makes sense, then I'm in a significantly healthier place mentally and spiritually, and I'm not surprised when someone dies. Now, of course, will I grieve? Of course I'll grieve, because we are emotional beings. We are, we're humans having a human experience, and we are still subject to the dense layer cake of ego and all of the emotions and conditioning that goes with it. But that's no excuse. We really do have significantly more sovereign control over our emotions than we are A, led to believe, and B, allow ourselves to believe. So that was a really long response to your question, but hopefully it just sort of probes into some of the areas of the book and what I'm trying to talk about to people now.
Absolutely. And there was one thing when you were talking about unexpected death and how no death is unexpected in such a way. You reminded me what they used to say in ancient Greece and also I think in ancient Rome, that we human beings are lit and extinguished like candles. So it is not up to us how long we're going to burn at some point, and no no one knows that. I mean, no matter, I think what your beliefs are on these matters, it is, I think, fair to assume that no one knows exactly when and how they're going to die. But so it shouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
unexpected, and even more, I think the more you ponder on it and contemplate on it, the more it makes you um, appreciate the life that you have before that inevitable, I won't call it ending, I will call it that change, because it is a change to something,
Transition.
transition, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And you have, and I would like to also to discuss with this, there is something practical we can do. You have that exercise in the book where it is about the end of life regrets. And I think if you could just
The
offer
5 minutes. Yeah.
a short description for the listener that now has been intrigued, but still talking about death or contemplating on death might be something that they still might not want to do or know how to do. But through that practice, I think it really gives an extra light of clarity in that.
Yeah, that's a great point. So early in the book, I suggest that if you told me I had 5 minutes left to live now, I would smile, give you a hug, and I would womble off to the nearest tree, sit under that tree, and I would gladly feel the sun on my face, the sitherism of the wind through the leaves, and I would just breathe in gratitude for what could only be described as an incredible life. That would be me. That would be me gone. Now, I'm very fortunate to be in that position, but as we've already alluded, and certainly the book goes into significantly more detail, that was not without many experiences to get me to that, and learning to get me to that stage. So I also invite the readers to do the same thing. If you had 5 minutes left to live right now, what would be on your list of regrets? Now, that's not what would you do, what you're going to do in the last 5 minutes of your life. That's not the point. The point is you've just found out you've only got 5 minutes left. So if you had to take a snapshot photograph of your life now, your relationship with your parents, your wife, your husband, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, siblings, whoever it is, regrets, worries, emotional outbursts, inaction, action, all of the things that you did say and didn't say, did do and didn't do. Can you write that list down? Obviously, you can have more than 5 minutes. That's not the point. The point is to take a cold, hard look at where you are right now and don't judge yourself. That's a fundamental point, but also don't lie to yourself. This is just you writing a list for you. You don't have to share it with Aggie or I. Well, obviously, you can share it with me if you like, because people do that all the time since I wrote this book. But the point is to have a really, really authentic conversation with yourself about where you're at right now. Now, an example I use in the book, my mum died. My mum actually, she was an alcoholic for my whole life. She survived a double mastectomy. And actually, she died of COPD, pulmonary disease. And she died in her sleep, in her armchair. She was a heart attack that killed her, so she died overnight. Now, I had actually seen her. She died on the 6th of January. I saw her on Christmas Day, and actually, it was quite nice. We weren't close really by the end, and actually, and I hadn't really spent a lot of time in her life because she constantly let me down. I'd try and try and try, but then she was drunk, and it just got to the stage somewhere in my 30s where I just decided I can't do this anymore. This is killing me. And then she was dead. Now, I didn't regret not seeing her because, as I explained, I'd seen her a week, 2 weeks prior. But what I began to regret through the grieving process was the other 30 odd years of absolute misery and tension and dissonance. I regretted that I couldn't do anything to stop her alcoholism. I also regretted a lot of the things that we'd said to one another. I regretted the fact that I'd not even been around for the mastectomy. I wasn't even in her life for any of that. So, the question to the audience is a really simple one. Do you want that? And I'm not just talking about your mum, obviously. I'm talking about everybody in your life. Because if the answer is, well, no, obviously I don't want that, Martin, then there's only you that can do something about that. And it's got to start with a list, and then it has to lead to action. And if you want my advice, soon as this podcast finishes, I would get busy doing it, because newsflash, you or they may well die in the next 5 minutes. And that's a sobering reality, isn't it? So, get busy living or get busy dying, as Morgan Freeman's character said in The Shawshank Redemption.
That's a wonderful movie, by the way. And, with doing that exercise, it requires you to look inwards, and you said, do it honestly, because it's only you, and it's no one else's list. I remember a few years ago when I did an exercise like that myself. It was like it was not 5 minutes for me. It was one day that you have 24 hours to live. Very similar effect, and it was the first time that I actually contemplated. I went somewhere on a beach actually, and I was sitting down because I wanted to really get into that feeling, because it's one thing to say, okay, well, what regrets would I have if I'm at the end of my life, when a very big part of you knows that you are not, and that is just a mental exercise. But so I had gone into I went on my own and just got into that mood to really feel the situation, that is the fact that I have 24 hours to live. And I really spent probably an hour at that time, Martin, and I was crying because when you really feel regret,
Yep.
it's not something you just casually. It is one of the most debilitating feelings. And you were saying earlier, about living the rat race and being in the matrix and all these things. And for many people, they think this is all right, or this it's not for them to change. And as far as I'm concerned, it deep inside yourself, if you are living this kind of life and you feel unfulfilled and you feel empty and you feel, then that is a clear sign, as far as I'm concerned, again, that there is something not right there. You need to seek something else. If you are living the rat race and you're on top of the world with your life, by all means carry it up. But I don't think that's the minority of the people. The majority are this, the quiet desperation, as Thoreau used to say. This was the first part of my intriguing conversation with Martin O'Toole. The conversation went for over an hour, and so I decided to split it in two parts. Join me in the next episode for the captivating conclusion to the conversation, where we discuss happiness, presence. It's really powerful. So join me in the next episode for part 2. Thank you for listening, and I hope you got valuable insights from today's episode. Follow Personal Development Mastery in Apple Podcasts or Spotify so that you get notified each time a new episode is available. If you already follow the show, then share it with a friend who you think will benefit from listening. Until next time, stand out, don't fit in.